All right, let's start off the show talking about something that's a real big issue now in financial planning and the financial status of most American families, and that's generational wealth transfer. What is generational wealth? Well, that refers to assets that are passed from one generation to somebody else in the family in another generation. We could be talking stocks and bonds, savings accounts, real estate, anything that you own. Can't take it with you when you die, right? You come in with nothing, you leave with nothing. Wealth doesn't disappear, it just transfers down the line. And now, because we have so many of the baby boomers now, their parents are dying off, their parents have accumulated significant wealth compared to their generation before them, and now that money is flowing down to the generation now in their late 50s, early 60s or so. In that area, we see a lot of money transferring down. As a financial planner, I see it more and more over the last 10 years than I did earlier in my career. And the amount of money that's being transferred is quite significant and life-changing for many of the people who are the beneficiaries of this money. So what is generational wealth? Well, it could be rich families passing down businesses, multi-million-dollar holdings. But for most inheritances, more than half, the inheritance is under $50,000. Which, is usually in the lower income, lower wealthy families, the poorer families, or middle-class families. And don't get me wrong, if I inherit $50,000, I'm pleased about that. But on the other end of the spectrum, only 2% of all inheritances exceed $1 million. Now that's smaller in number because it's only 2%, but it's 40% of the money that's being passed down are going to 2% of the population. The 55% majority, they add up to less than 6% of the money that's being transferred. And this is wealth inequality. You hear about wealth inequality. This is it. It stays within the same families. Families that were wealthy in the 1800s are still passing that wealth down to generations later here in the 2020s. The majority of assets within a family that are not spent just keep going down the line. So the wealthy stay wealthy and their progeny stay wealthy. It's almost like nobility in the old days. The wealthy landowners would pass their land down to their children and then to their grandchildren, and that land and that wealth would stay within that family. And the problem is, a lot of people say, well, wait a second, the wealthy stay wealthy, but the poor stay poor because there's nothing for them to inherit. And that's an understandable thing. And that's the wealth gap. And a lot of people say that's racial inequality, because white families are both more likely to have received an inheritance and also more likely to expect to receive an inheritance. About 17% of white families expect an inheritance compared to 6% of black families, 4% of Hispanic families, and 50% of other families. White families who look forward to receiving an inheritance expected a larger one. A median of $195,500 for white families versus $150,000 for Hispanic families and $100,000 for both black and other families. And the disparity in inheritances is one factor behind the disparity in total wealth when you're looking along racial lines. And this is the racial wealth gap that you hear about. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis did a survey in 2019, and they came up with the following statistics. It said that a typical white family in the United States had $184,000 in wealth, while a typical black family had $23,000, and a typical Hispanic family had $38,000. Now, when we say typical, that means median terms of wealth. Obviously, there's some with a lot more, a lot with some less, but you average it out. There's one positive development toward reducing this racial wealth gap. Black and Hispanic wealth grew at a faster pace than white wealth between 2016 and 2019, increasing 32% for non-Hispanic black families, 40% for Hispanic families of any race, and 4% for white families. But in dollar terms, however, white families still gain more wealth because they had substantially more of it to start. So this generational transfer of wealth that we talk about, it is a big, big deal for the beneficiaries of this wealth, because many of them are severely in debt as they're heading towards retirement, haven't saved up a lot, and their inheritance is their retirement plan. And like I said, I'm seeing it every day in my practice. People are coming in to me, never had money before, and they're inheriting $500,000 from their parents. And obviously they're ill prepared to know what to do with it because they've had no experience with money. But the first thing I do with a beneficiary, somebody who's inheriting a lot of money, is we look at their debt situation. The most important thing to do with your inheritance is to get out of debt. For the most part. There's some debt that's good. If you have a mortgage with a very low interest rate, I'm not too concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the credit cards, the auto loans, the student loans. And this really is a big boost towards people's retirement planning. And thankfully, there's millions and trillions of dollars out there that are passing down in the next 5 to 10 years to the next generation because they're ill prepared for retirement. We've talked about it on the program many, many times. Here's I'll get to this maybe later. Here's a headline: nearly half of all Americans expect to retire in debt. Survey finds 46% of all Americans expect to retire in debt. We'll talk about the total debt, which is quite substantial. So when someone says to me, "I'm inheriting the money," well, all right, let's take a look and see what your debt situation is like, and let's eliminate that first, especially the bad debt. Then we'll talk about investments. We'll talk about other things. Now, what you inherit is very important. It makes a big deal of difference on how it affects you. If you inherit someone's retirement plan, their IRA account, or an annuity, or a pension, or something like that, or their 401k, you have a tax situation that you have to be concerned about. Because you use that money for anything, it's taxable. So someone comes to me and they say, well, I inherited my $500,000 dad's IRA account. I can't tell you to take that money and pay off your mortgage or pay off a large credit card debt without considering the tax ramifications of that. And the issue lies in also that usually when you're inheriting money, as long as your parents aren't 90 when you're inheriting it, then you're 70, you may be retired. But if you're inheriting that money when you're in your 50s or early 60s and haven't retired yet, if you pull money out, that's going to go on top of the income you're already earning, which means the tax bracket's going to be a lot higher. Another tax consideration you have now is with the new tax law a couple of years ago, you have to take the money out of an IRA if you inherit it in 10 years. The old law was that you could take it out over the course of your life expectancy, which meant you could take a little bit out a year over the course of your life. You didn't have to have it out in 10 years. But what's actually a money grab by the government, they want all that money coming out of these retirement plans that people are inheriting in 10 years to get that tax revenue. And unfortunately for the beneficiaries of these IRAs, they may still be working over that 10-year period. So they got to pull money out on top of their other income and be taxed at a higher tax bracket. Or if they wait and push it off, they may have to take it out when they're retired and collecting Social Security, and now by taking a bunch out, they make 85% of their Social Security taxable, or their Medicare Part B premiums go up because their income is too high in that given year. There's all kinds of problems. So generational transfers, it's better to inherit something that's not a retirement plan. if given two options, Dad's stock portfolio versus his IRA account, I want his stock portfolio, assuming it's not in an IRA account. Because 100% of that money is mine. It's received a stepped up cost basis for capital gains purposes, meaning there's very little, if any, income taxes that have to be paid on liquidating that account. I could access it, I could spend it, I could pay down debt without any tax consequences whatsoever. Not the case when you inherit an IRA account or an annuity that has a big profit in it or whatever. So inheriting non-retirement assets is always a benefit. And some people make a mistake in their will, a retirement plan, an IRA, has a beneficiary, so it's not part of the will. But what if you say, okay, my daughter gets my $200,000 IRA account, my son gets the house. They're worth about the same. So I don't feel like I'm slighting one versus the other. Oh, yes, you are. You're slighting the one that gets your $200,000 IRA because part of it's Uncle Sam's. And possibly the state's as well, part of the state. So you have to worry about that. You're going to say, well, if 25% is going to go to governments in the form of taxation, well, the 200,000 IRA is only worth about 75% of it. It's worth 150,000 after taxes. So you got to be careful on what type of assets you leave either your children or your beneficiaries, whoever they are. Another concern with generational wealth transfer has been in the past, especially estate taxes. Estate taxes are a tax that you're taxed on the value of your estate. And nowadays it's over $11 million per person. A married couple could have almost $24 million in exempt assets. Now, the Dems want to change that. They want to bring it down. I don't think it's in their Build Back Broker bill that just passed on party lines the other day. But they want to. If they could, they will do it. I don't think it's going to happen now because if they're not passing it now in their reconciliation bill, then they're never going to get another shot at it because they're not going to have power in Congress again, at least for a long time, in my opinion anyway, and many smarter people than me in politics. So unless you're very wealthy, you don't have to worry about taxes on the generational transfer as far as estate taxes go. Inheritance tax, we talked a couple of weeks about that. Some states have it. New Jersey is one of, I think, 6 or 7 states that have inheritance tax. And that is not, if you're a spouse, there's no inheritance tax. If you're a child or grandchild and you inherit money, it's not no inheritance tax. But if you're somebody else in a state that has inheritance tax, a brother, a sister, a friend, whatever, then you're going to look at inheritance tax. Now, there's exemption for part of it. It depends on what type of class beneficiary you are here in New Jersey. Class A is exempt from taxes. That's the spouse, civil union. Children or grandchildren. Those are exempt totally. That's a Class A beneficiary. Class B was eliminated a long time ago. Class C is a brother or sister, a civil union partner or surviving civil union partner of a child of a decedent. The first $25,000 is exempt in that case. Then the next million is 11%, and it goes up from there. Class D beneficiary is everybody else. That's somebody that's not a brother or sister. It's taxed from the very beginning. The first 700,000 is 15%, and over 700,000 is 16%. There's other exemptions for qualified charities, religious institutions, educational medical institutions. The state of New Jersey or any of its political subdivisions, it's nice that the state exempts themselves from inheritance tax. I don't see who's going to leave the state of New Jersey as the beneficiary. but something else to consider in generational transfers. Who's going to get it, and is there an inheritance tax in your estate? Now, people ask me, well, what if you know you're dying, and can I just gift all my money to my kids? The kids wouldn't matter, but my brother and sister, and avoid that inheritance tax? The answer is no, you can't do that, because there's a 3-year look-back period. I wasn't sure how, I was asked that question a couple of weeks back, but there is a 3-year look-back period. The state knows people try to game the system. If you have $500,000 in assets that your brother's going to inherit, and you know there's going to be a $75,000 New Jersey inheritance tax on it, why not just give them the money now before I die in 6 months? Well, the states, they understand that people try to do that. So they're going to look back 3 years to see if any transfers went to any family members that would have been subject to the inheritance tax. All right, let's take a break. 732-505-1160 is the call number. My name's Lou Scatigna. Don't go.